that is an inspiration for me, more specifically, my grandfather. So I'll kind of walk through all this in terms of the inspiration. Remember, my grandfather was a person that I never met. In 1960, he was no longer with us. I was born in 1967, so you talk about a 7-year period. But family history, what I know about my family, they were the standard bearers. And that let me know that this cannot be left to chance. There is an expectation that would be for me and my family. Think about Will Husband, my great-grandfather. He owned a 200-acre farm in Mississippi. And he was run off of that farm. And so you can imagine what life was like back then. If you did too much or did too well as a black person, you had to leave. And so he left Clark, Mississippi, and moved to Richton, Mississippi, in Perry County, where he bought another 40 acres that we own to this day. Our family owns one of the few families.
Yes, sir.
And so it's about those expectations that he set for himself and for his children. He couldn't read. I look at documents, homestead documents, where he made his ex and his wife, Mary Cooley, she was the one that could write. There was an expectation of education. So these were the kinds of things that I saw in my family on my grandmother's side. On my grandfather's side, the same thing. That expectation of knowing that he was born in Indiantown, Louisiana, and he and his three of his brothers, they were run out of town. And we know the stories that confusion with someone in the white community living and having to leave the town. So we know those stories so many times. His name was actually MC Bowers, and he changed it to Joe Taylor. And so that's where the Taylor name comes from. Two of his brothers changed their last name, but they kept the first name. And so I discovered that story about 3 years ago through Ancestry.com, looking online, and I saw a person who had MC Bowers dash Joe Taylor. I said, this cannot be a coincidence. And the picture, the only picture I have of my grandfather was when he was probably 61 years old. And this picture of him was a young man about 20 years old, and it looked just like my oldest brother. And then I flipped through the pictures and saw a picture of his mother, which is a picture that I've known my entire life. So I knew I had the right person, so I made that connection. But that inspiration goes beyond that, because he was a registered voter in Mississippi in the 1930s and the 1940s. And I still have copies of the poll tax that he and my grandmother paid in order to be a registered voter. And that is why I tell my children, I don't give a doggone who you vote for. But you will vote. That is the expectation that was set back in the 1930s for me. And so that's the kind of thing that I have in terms of the expectation for my daughters, because I have 2 daughters and a son. My grandmother was a business owner, and she and my grandfather worked hand in hand to make sure that she had a voice, she was a representative, she did things to help unfortunate people in the neighborhood. I remember that my mom told me how she would take food down to my father's house because she knew that his mother and father didn't have enough to feed the children. So those are the things about how you support people in your community, and you have that expectation. And so my grandfather was murdered in 1960 with my mom sitting in the car, and she still has the buckshot in her hand to this day. And so we asked why this was the case, because he was one of those people that was an agitator. And so he set the expectation that if I can't go to your store and shop as a black man, I will not go. And so that is what he set as an expectation. He didn't do that. And so when I look back at that inspiration, I say that if he gave his life, then I definitely have to step up to the plate and be able to do it. When I look at how he approached education, I have the books that my grandfather owned in my office to this day that has his handwriting and all those different things that he and my grandmother and other people in the family did. And so when I think about inspiration, I can look at historical figures and take all sorts of things from that. But I absolutely know that the grounding that I have comes from my family, from a whole host of people as a family and specific individuals. And I know it is my responsibility to be able to pass that on to my children as well. And me and my brothers, we do that. My nephew was here with me about 3 weeks ago, and there's a picture of my grandfather on the wall. And we began